China is running its clothing over the move, decrying. Okay, China is basically saying that, hold on here. Sorry, I didn't read these before. My bad. I'll just edit this out. I'm going to read this right now. Okay. So welcome to episode 117 of Farm to Markets. Today we are talking about Western states buying gold, tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, the U.S. Surgeon General's warning on parenting, postnatal wellness centers, and if a longer life is determined by genetics or lifestyle. All right, so long considered the most reliable store of wealth over the course of human history, gold remains a popular investment, coming in third behind real estate and stocks, ETF, mutual funds, but ahead of cash savings, CDs, bonds, and cryptocurrency, which came in last. Investors' interest in gold often varies by age, net worth, and many other factors. One factor is geographical location. Western states stretching from the Rockies to the border of the West Coast states show the most interest in gold, as well as Alaska, the state most interested in gold as an investment. Why do you think these Western states and Alaska, why do you think they're more interested in gold than the rest of the nation?
So I thought this was a pretty interesting article reading it. I think they listed a handful of reasons, and two of them that I thought made the most sense to me were that you have a combination of these are the states where, for the most part, they came into the union the latest, and many of them experienced, gold and silver mining booms. So it's just kind of ingrained, I think, in the culture. It wasn't that many generations ago that, a lot of people who moved to these states were, prospectors, or people who served the prospectors and made money that way. I did think it was interesting that the state where it all kind of kicked off in large quantities, California, is largely not interested in gold so much anymore. I think that's a big one. The other one too is I think a lot of people who live in the West or choose to live in the West, so maybe they move from Florida or New York or whatever, choose to live in the West, have kind of an inherent distrust in the federal government. You tend to see a lot less interest in federal authority in the inland West. And so by default, I think you see a lot less trust in the federal government's money. So I think it's kind of a combination of there's a heritage of it, and then there's a culturally ingrained distrust in fiat currency. And I think those two things kind of synthesize into, people in, the West, quote unquote, being real interested in gold.
I'd be curious to see how they did their polling. Maybe it was mentioned in the article, but I don't know if they did it by age. Obviously they did it by geography, where you're at in the country. But say that is the case. This article is accurate. I think it's probably a pretty simple concept. I mean, the Mountain West states and Alaska, they have a rich history tied to gold mining. Like Alex said, it's ingrained in their culture. There's also an economic appreciation and history for gold being a valuable physical asset, within these states in this region. So this makes gold very familiar. It's comfortable. It's part of their heritage. So that seems to be a natural place where people will gravitate when times are volatile. When things get scary, it's comforting. It's like comfort food to some folks, I guess. And if you go back far enough in the Mountain West history, your family was probably mining for gold at some point in time. I mean, Montana, our state seal is oro y plata, gold and silver. It's in our heritage. So yeah, it's not a big shocker that people like gold and silver. Now I'm just speculating, but I could see that other states, maybe in the eastern part of the country, may have economies more centered around the financial services or technology or other sectors that are more closely tied to the stock market. So I think it's just kind of a familiarity bias and a comfort bias. That's my opinion on this. But again, I would kind of like to see where they got their polling data, because you take young people in isolation, I think you're going to get a pretty dominating cryptocurrency bias in terms of where they go for when things are volatile. But that's just my opinion.
I think the reason why Alaska is by far the ones who lead in wanting gold is because it's 2024. If this was 1830, I think that the people living in Western Pennsylvania and Western Virginia would be the ones who cared more about gold than government fiat currency. I agree with Alex. I think that the West, we tend to attract people from all over the country, if not over the world, who have an inherent distrust of the government. And when all is said and done, if you have to, you can hide your gold. You can do a lot of things to hide the fact that you're wealthy through gold. You can't necessarily do that with stocks or savings accounts. I'd say that probably by far the most popular investment for our clients has always been real estate. They just like the tangibility of it. And I think that in times of despair, people start wanting to buy gold, very, very similar for the same reason they want to buy real estate, is it's tangible, and it's really, really hard to mess with the value of it. It either is worth something or it's not.
Yeah, when you look at, I pulled up just like a political map, and most of the states that have a strong interest in gold tend to be more conservative states. The outliers are Oregon and New Mexico. And I'm wondering if, just the people who, from what I've heard, that people kind of live in the rural parts of Oregon tend to be more conservative than obviously around Portland area. So I wonder if those are the people buying gold. Drew brought up a good point, though, is that it might be too. I'd kind of like to look at a map by age, because it might be that younger people consider cryptocurrency like digital gold, like a lot of these hedge fund managers and stuff like that. So like when you get towards the cities, hypothetically, I'm assuming that maybe the population is younger, so you might get more interest in the cryptocurrencies. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When I look at the political map, most of the states that like gold tend to be conservative states. Solve that problem. All right. So Canada is joining a slate of nations like the US and EU in imposing tariffs on Chinese vehicles, as well as steel, aluminum, and other exports from communist countries. China is decrying the violations to the World Trade Organization, decrying violations to World Trade Organization rules. Chinese EVs, geez, that's hard to say. Chinese EVs are rare in North America, so it's not likely to hurt existing sales. But the Chinese automakers were hoping to expand to Canada and the U.S. in the near future. Should China be upset, and should the West continue to wrap up tariffs on Chinese EVs or electric vehicles?
So anybody who's watched this for a long time will probably know my opinion on trade, but I will say this, that China can complain all they want, but this is a country that illegally manipulates its currency's value, it subsidizes its exports, it steals intellectual property, it violates freedom of navigation treaties. This is a country that is a habitual violator of World Trade Organization rules. And when the World Trade Organization rules against them in their courts, they ignore the ruling. They conveniently really, really like the World Trade Organization when they rule in their favor, though. So ultimately, I would say that if China doesn't like this, they should probably stop what they're doing. Otherwise, there's just going to be more and more of the same. And to me, if China's not willing to reciprocate free trade, if our ports are wide open to their exports, duty free and everything else, and they're not reciprocating, we don't have free trade. So to me, if they're not willing to play by the rules they agree to play by, then the West shouldn't play by those rules either. So if China wants free trade, then they should abide by the agreements they've already made and stop manipulating their currency and stop stealing intellectual property. I have no problem with tit for tat. So if China wants to put a stop to it, I would say the ball's in their court.
I'm not coming at this as from a angle of, oh, poor China, stop picking on them. or China's me and let's do something to hurt them. I'm more of stop hurting me, stop doing this and stop picking on me by hurting China, or in this case, I guess Canadian citizens. I've said this before too. I guess tariffs and protectionism comes up on this show every few months or so, but I think everyone knows my opinion as well. But I think tariffs are just a form of trade protectionism that interferes with the natural flow of goods and services, and it often leads to economic inefficiencies. And instead of leveling the playing field, I see tariffs as creating this environment of hostility and retaliation, which I think undermines international cooperation and economic growth. So instead of resorting to tariffs, I think Canada and its allies, they should focus on innovating, increasing competitiveness through investments in technology and infrastructure, and maybe even engage in diplomatic efforts to address concerns about subsidies within the framework of the World Trade Organization. So I'm not a big fan of this. I think it's silly, but I guess at the end of the day, it's still Canada. They can do what they want.
Like Drew and Alex have both said, is that I think my positions on free trade are pretty well known for the people who've been watching farmer markets for the last couple of years. I've always believed that tariffs is one of those things where your adversary, let's say the Chinese, are abusing their citizens in order to get more profits. And what ends up happening is that Americans, consumers, get things less expensive than if they bought things locally. So if I'm able to buy an electric vehicle for $30,000 that was manufactured in China, but if I buy one in the United States and it costs $60,000, I don't see how it's helping me if you punish the Chinese. I'd rather say, hey, let the Chinese punish their own people. Let them impoverish their own people. Let them tax them into oblivion so that I can get cheap electric vehicles. The whole tariff thing, I think, is counterproductive. I think you end up hurting more people than you assist. So from a utilitarian point of view, I'm not a big fan of tariffs. With that said, I go along with Drew. I don't really cry any tears for China because they certainly aren't saints in any way, shape, or form. If you're going to call on the World Trade Organization to advocate for you, you might first start by following the rules of the World Trade Organization. So either you're a member of good standing of the WTO, or just shut up.
Yeah, my two younger boys, they fight with each other, and my younger one is constantly hitting and scratching and pulling my older boy's hair. And my older boy, he's not really a fighter. He's kind of a gentle kid, so a lot of times he just puts up with it. But then one day, he smacked his younger brother, and his younger brother came whining to me, crying to me, and was like, all distraught and all this kind of stuff. And because he didn't like it when his older brother fought back. And that's kind of the same thing with China. It's like you've been breaking all these rules for years, and then when somebody hits you, all of a sudden now you're crying foul. Like nobody really cares. It's tough politically. I'm a pretty big proponent of free trade. I could be persuaded on some national security issues, but ultimately, like the tariffs are kind of like a goodie bag because it's like kind of like the taxes on tips issue. Is that if I say, hey, I'm going to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., it's easier to point to like an abandoned factory and say, hey, we're going to fill this with jobs than it is just say, hey, we're just gonna let them do what they're going to do. So I think politically, it's going to be hard to not get the tariffs. And then also, I wonder how much of these electric vehicles are actually going to get hit with tariffs, because what it seems like the Chinese are doing is they just send all their goods over to Vietnam, and then Vietnam ships them to the U.S. and they avoid the tariffs. So again, like I have no hard feelings for China. I wonder if they're just going to we're just going to start getting electric vehicles from Vietnam instead of directly from China. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Saw they were thinking about opening factories in Mexico, so that would be kind of interesting to see how USMCA rules would cover a Chinese state, partially potentially state-owned EV manufacturer in Mexico. Would that count as 70% made in North America under USMCA rules? I'd be curious to see.
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies have been starting to do that, especially with the Taiwan situation. supply chains are getting kind of reorganized a little bit to consider tariffs and kind of avoid geopolitical issues.
It's kind of strange how we got here, gentlemen, is that first of all, hardly anybody in the United States wants an electric vehicle. Yeah. Several state governments are mandating that they have to sell electronic vehicles. And so now probably the greatest provider of vehicles that meet the regulatory requirements of the federal government is a communist adversary. Yeah. If we just get government out of the picture, I think most Americans would just be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You probably reached a place of compliancy with government intervention in economics, though, because everybody used to be really afraid of tariffs during the Depression with the Smoot-Hawley Act, like in 1930. But I feel like it's just become so commonplace lately that people are just like, they just kind of accept it as the government participates in economics, which is obviously not good, but.
But it's interesting how capitalism works, because what the tariffs are essentially doing is someone who invests, who is divesting from a certain company on the secondary market, it makes absolutely no difference. So if China does, go through Vietnam to get their cars here, really, what was the point of the tariffs in the first place? Like if someone didn't like Ford stock and they sold their used Ford, to stick it to Ford, it made no difference. Ford already got paid when they sold it off the lot. So it's just kind of funny to see how this thing's going to, makes no difference.
Okay, so there's a new U.S. Surgeon General's warning, and it basically says that parenting can be harmful to your mental health. So an advisory issued Wednesday by the nation's doctors, so the U.S. Surgeon General, said that parents in particular are under dangerous levels of stress. The report cites the American Psychological Association, saying nearly half of parents report overwhelming stress most days, compared with 26% of other adults. So compared with 26% of other adults, they're lonelier. So they're also lonelier, according to data cited by health insurer Cigna. So in 2021, a survey found that 65% of parents said they were lonely, compared with 55% of those without kids. Do you think this U.S. Surgeon General's warning is just hyperbole, or do you think it's actually that serious?
Yeah, I guess I would say, yeah, it's hyperbole to issue a Surgeon General's warning over the notion that parents are more stressed out and don't get to spend as much time with their friends than people who don't have kids. Like on the news broadcast, the next story must have been water is wet. So it really doesn't surprise me at all when you read the stats. It doesn't sound like they're significantly more lonely than people without kids. 55% of people said they're lonely who don't have kids, and 65% with kids said, it's more. But, I think the more interesting number is that more than half of Americans say they're lonely than, parents don't get to spend much time with people, that they would want to spend time with, and instead have to deal with their own kids. So yeah, I think it's hyperbole to issue a Surgeon General's warning over that. So no surprise there.
I'm glad that I didn't know I was stressed till Dr. Vivek, what is that, Murthy? Vivek Murthy, is he the Surgeon General? Yeah, I didn't know that till he told me that. And I'm sure he's going to offer a solution too. This is big government, letting us know there's a problem, and, they're going to fix it for us. Frankly, I'm offended by this article, because it puts me in this group of parents who apparently can't handle the stress of being parents. If parents are more stressed, and I think maybe they are, or at least parents are stressed, I think it's a cultural shift from becoming softer and thinking that life is only good when everything is sunshines and rainbows. The hard times in parenting, that's life. Not being stressed was never in the cards. And for some reason, if this article is right, it makes parents seem like we're just entitled to stress-free lives. I don't agree with that. I think every parenting era comes with its challenges. We have it pretty good right now. We don't have a war, disease, depression right now. Things are pretty good. I think we need to we need less big government doling out these problems and more more community, sharing life with friends and families. I think this generation of kids and parents is probably a little more isolated, mostly through technology. We're all kind of absorbed in our screens. That means we're spending less real life with our friends, family, and community. I think that's a big source of the loneliness. So if parents do want to feel less stressed and less isolated and less lonely, I think you need to put yourself in situations where those things don't happen.
Back to our earlier question about gold and who's been surveyed, maybe if you're talking to 32-year-old parents, yeah, maybe they might be a little isolated and lonely. But what if you're talking to 70-year-old parents or 70-year-old parents or 70-year-old people who are single, and you need somebody to drive you to the hospital, or you need somebody to pick up your prescription drugs or some groceries for you, or you need somebody to help out with some light housework around the house. You want to see some lonely people. I'll show you a whole bunch of childless people who are in their 60s and 70s. They're really lonely compared to the folks who had kids. Drew and his family live right next door to me. I see his driveway, and there are constantly people driving into his driveway with kids in the back seat, for play dates, and there just seems to be a lot of social activity. So I think that it's really we live in an age where people are lonely because they spend too much time on the phone and not enough time building relationships, either with the children they created or their friends. So I think loneliness is pretty much a choice in America. I think the default position is get on your phone and communicate. But with a little bit of effort, you can fix the loneliness problem almost automatically.
Yeah, I mean, there's always something to complain about. Life just in general is stressful. So, I mean, if you want to complain about parenting, great. If you want to complain about being alone with no kids, there's that too. So, I mean, it's just, everything's going to be hard. So I think this was, you might as well just issue a U.S. Surgeon's General on life and just warning people that, it's hard. So, yeah.
They should just play. So there's a famous clip of Vince McMahon, the old pro wrestling promoter. He's cutting a promo in the ring, about Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he just says life sucks and then you die. He should have just played that instead of issuing a Surgeon General's warning.
Right.
So
yeah, for sure. All right. Let's see here. So keeping on the subject of parenting, so there's luxury hotels such as the Waldorf Astoria, renowned for offering impeccable service to clientele, are now catering to unexpected VIPs, newborns, and their parents. Postnatal wellness centers, modeled after the ones in Taiwan and Korea, are popping up in American cities and hotels. So for up to $1,500 per night, families leave the hospital and head to a retreat or check into an R&R later. They indulge in recovery, coaching, in newborn care, and pampering. Perhaps the most convenient service, however, is the 24/7 nursery staff, according to new parents affording new parents the elusive treasure of sleep. Do you close that? What do you think? Is $1,500 a night enough to have somebody help you take care of your newborn baby, or is that too much to have somebody help you take care of your newborn baby, or is this something that you would spring for after your first kid, or maybe your third kids, or maybe if you had twins? I don't know.
Well, I don't know if so. Beth and I have two kids. I don't know if we would have paid that, but I absolutely believe that it's something people would pay. Just around here, so our kids were both born in Kalispell, but other parents our age who say they had their kids in Whitefish at the hospital there, man, they make it sound like they went to a luxury retreat compared to Kalispell. So I don't know if either of you guys had your kids in Whitefish versus Kalispell, but yeah. So I absolutely believe that if given the choice and if money's not too big a factor, people would go to the luxury hospital or the luxury, post-birth care facility, whatever you call it, to go be pampered for a week or so with a newborn baby. I 100% believe they would do it.
I see why parents do this. That sounds nice. You know, if you can go to the Waldorf and basically have the resort life and have everything taken care of, and you have the nurses and the midwives, whoever's taking care of the baby, so you can sleep. That sounds nice. That's a little steep for me. I would have it myself. I understand why people who had the money would, but also I don't think I would want to do that. I kind of like I like going through the hard times as parents. It gives you something to think about and reflect on. I don't think a good life is just avoiding stress. I think it's living through, persevering through that stress. That's the good stuff. So me personally, I wouldn't do it, but hey, if it's an option for some people and they want to do it, more power to them.
The question is, who's paying for it? If the individual is paying for it, I salute them with both hands. But if it gets to the point where public policy requires health insurance companies to cover this sort of thing, then all of a sudden I'll start to get nervous. I remember when Drew's sister was born, I was stationed in Hawaii, and my wife used to work for J.C. Penney, so she had the option of going the military medicine hospital or the civilian hospital. And she opted for the civilian hospital because for a $5 copay, after my daughter was born, my wife was discharged to this like birthing room with like lava lamps and mood lights and soft music, breakfast in bed. There was a pull-out bed for me to spend the night, breakfast in bed the next morning before they discharged you, a whole like kit of baby smart stuff, and then when Drew was born, he was born at Camp Lester Naval Hospital in Okinawa, Japan, where the 4th floor was the birthing department, and they had 8 women all screaming in one side of the floor. And then when it was your turn to kick out a kid, they would gurney you over to the other side, pop out your kid, and then wheel you back to the other side. Now, both of my kids were born healthy, and arguably, I don't know that the Camp Lester Naval Hospital experience was less healthy, but given the choice, people will pay $5 copay, and as long as the insurance company is paying for the other one.
Yeah, all my kids were born in Whitefish. And I did not accept the lavender bath that they offered me, but it was definitely an option. And my insurance, even Christian Healthcare Sharing Ministries, was covering the bill for it. So I mean, if they're going to cover the bill for it, great. And if insurance companies want to cover the bill for the Waldorf Astoria, I would definitely take that. That was on my plan. However, I'm not sure that I want to pay the premiums for my own plan. Plus, pay the extra cost for everybody to show up at the Waldorf Astoria with their newborn baby. I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of that. So but if my insurance company did cover it, I'd probably take advantage of it. But I don't agree with that, the insurance company. All right. Anyways, so Centenarians, or people who live to be 100 and beyond, are often looked to be are also looked to for health advice by media outlets, hoping to glean some secret knowledge that will help us all live longer. Scientists, however, argue that doing this is just survivorship bias. In other words, the dietary and exercise habits of 100-year-olds had little or no effect on their longevity. Scientists argue that genetics and a bit of luck, meaning something they didn't understand yet, probably better explain why people live to be 100 and beyond. Do you think it's genetics, or do you think it's lifestyle that gets Centenarians to where they are?
I think it's still kind of a bit of a mystery. I tend to lean more towards genetics, though. It seems like poor decisions can definitely shorten your life, but some of the people who live for a very long time, you read about like these 120-year-old Japanese women who ate nothing but a raw egg and a pile of seaweed every day for 90 years. And, everybody kind of thinks, oh, it makes sense. But then you read stories about like this guy from West Virginia. I think there was a guy from Montana like a decade ago who was over 100. This guy like smoked a pack a day and ate McDonald's every day. A guy in West Virginia was just, celebrated. He got a plaque in the local McDonald's for eating McDonald's every day for like 30 years. So I'm not sure that, 100% it's definitely genetics, or 100% it's definitely lifestyle. Most of the people who eat McDonald's and smoke a pack a day probably aren't going to make it to 100. Most of the people who eat a raw egg and a pile of seaweed every day probably aren't going to make it to 100. It seems to be probably genetic, but I guess ultimately we don't know. I think if you take care of yourself and, a combination of modern medicine and just don't go hog wild on, consuming poisons, I think you'll probably do just fine. But I think at the real extreme end of, longevity, it's probably a bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah, I agree with that, Alex. I don't think it's very black or white. I mean, I don't like to use the words never or always in this sense. I mean, the article's titled "Never Take Health Tips from the World's Oldest People," says scientists. Well, I don't think you should never do that. I don't think you should just only do that. I think it's important to acknowledge the survivorship bias, and I think it's important to understand that correlation doesn't always equal causation. But I don't see it, too much harm in studying the oldest people and looking for these commonalities, looking at the data. And look, if I wanted to study good distance runners and I wanted to get the commonalities and see what the data is, I'm going to study Kenyans and Ethiopians. I'm not going to go to the island of Samoa. So I think it's important to, take a healthy dose of both. But like Alex said, I don't think it's one or the other. I think if your odds of wanting to live long, I think you have to have some good genetics, and it doesn't hurt to have a healthy lifestyle too.
I certainly believe it's a combination of both. I think that some people are just predisposed to live longer, and as long as they don't do something incredibly foolish, I think the odds are in their favor. They're going to live longer than the average bear. But I think that if there's one thing that we can correlate is happiness. I think that unhappy people tend to die younger, and happier people, whether they take care of themselves or not, tend to live longer than the people who are unhappy. So I'd say if you're really concerned about living longer, work on being happy.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it is a bit of a. I mean, I think it's a mix of all of them. It's the same thing in Major League Baseball. It's like how can you have a guy throw 100 to 101 miles an hour for like 10 years and never have an arm problem, and you have some kids who can't make it through high school. A lot of it's genetics. I saw one story about a gentleman who lived to be a centurion, and his claim is that if you drink a beer a day, it'll get you there, and I think that was true for him. But I don't know it's necessarily true for everybody else. So, and I've known like really healthy people who get, cancer and pass away at a young age. So it's, again, I think if you're, it certainly doesn't hurt to eat healthy. And then, if you have like lots of people, I guess lonely people pass away faster. So I think it's a combination of all of them, and you don't necessarily need to discount what centurions are telling you. So I wouldn't say don't listen to them, but I think there's a number of factors that go into it, and a lot of it is still just not understood. All right, that's it for episode 117 of Farm to Markets. We'll see you again soon.